We lost Tina Turner last year, but her legacy lives on, even though she hadn't lived in the United States in years. So in this video, I want to explore the events that led her to leave the United States by looking at her chart. But first, let's start by going back to where her career really started to take off. She re-recorded and released Let's Stay Together by Al Green in November 1983. To the Capitol Records' surprise, it moved up the charts, so they okayed for her to do her first solo album. So she had 2 weeks to record it. She recorded it in Europe. I remember watching a documentary where she said that when she went to Europe to record her album, she was so happy there, and it kind of felt like home for her. So I guess that was the beginning of her looking at the possibility of going to Europe permanently. So the album that she worked on was released in May 1984, and she released the single "What's Love Got to Do with It," which, as far as I know, she wasn't really impressed with this song, but she did record it and release it as the first single, and it ended up being a number one on the Billboard Hot 100 charts. So she ended up going on tour with Lionel Richie. For those of you who don't know who Lionel Richie is, he's been around for a long time as well. He used to be with the Commodores, but that's another story. She ended up winning 3 Grammys with this album. So in terms of looking at her charts, at that time, she had an aspect that I saw. It was the progressed sun. That's the sun in her progressed chart, trine her birth chart Uranus. So the sun rules her ascendant or her rising sign, which, for those of you that don't know, Tina was a rising Leo. She was a rising Leo. Yes, her sun was in Sagittarius. She was a Sag, but she was a rising Leo, which when you think about her and her stage presence, to me, it makes a lot of sense. So sun was ruling her rising sign, and Uranus actually ruled her midheaven, or MC. And this is the area that rules our vocation, our career. So these two form a trine, which is a positive aspect between each other. And I noticed that usually when people have a positive aspect between either the ascendant, the rising sign, and the midheaven, or the planets in the first house, in the 10th house, or a mix of the two, are the rulers of those two areas, the rising sign and the midheaven. Usually that means that a person has an opportunity to succeed in their career, but it's not just any type of success. It's usually a success that is outside of the regular 9 to 5. For some people, it is creative. If they're a creative person, whether it's music, acting, sports, this is a good opportunity for them to succeed because it is not the regular 9 to 5 where you have a boss and stuff like that, not a technical boss. So another reason this is really important for Tina Turner is because in her birth chart, actually still a progressed chart, she had her progressed Uranus square her birth chart ascendant, that Leo ascendant. So this is more of a long-term aspect. And the reason why I say it's long-term is because while this ascendant can move fairly quickly throughout your life, the generational planets like Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, they don't move very fast. So wherever those 3 planets were at the time of your birth, even in your progressed chart, they're pretty much going to be in the same spot. So her progressed Uranus hadn't moved that much from her time of birth. So that progressed Uranus hadn't moved a lot, and it was still squaring her birth rising sign of Leo, which is where it was when she pretty much, for the most part, around where it was when she was born. And that's what makes it long-term for her. And because Uranus does rule the midheaven or the MC, which rules her career, this suggests that she would have a long-term issue related to her career. Like somehow her career would be at odds And there'd be a lot of miscellaneous and unpredictable situations that would get in the way of her progress. And it's kind of it's such a permanent condition that it really is like lifelong. So that progressed aspect between the sun trining her birth chart, her natal Uranus, was like a reprieve from that. She was finally able to see like the rainbow at the end of the cloud, the rain and all of that stuff. She was finally able to see that. It was just taking a long time for her to get there. And to give you some context, for those of you that may be younger, I absolutely was not here throughout her whole career, but some people may be even younger and not really remember her that well. To give you some context, when her first album came out with, the single What's Love Got to Do with It, she was around 44, 45 years old. So this really was a long-term struggle for her to be able to succeed professionally and specifically on her own. To give you some additional context behind that, I mentioned her divorce with Ike Turner. And once she divorced him and left him, she had a lot to deal with. She had to deal with she wasn't able to perform as much as at the level that she would like to. She might perform at like hotel ballrooms and wherever she could, and she was on food stamps and stuff like that. So she was performing regularly when she was with Ike, but when she left him, she was flat broke and struggling quite a bit for herself and her sons, her children. So she had a lot to deal with after she left Ike. So this was really a big climb back. And that's part of the reason why she was around 44, 45 years old by the time she finally really, really broke out. And so this, to me, this says a lot about life and how we cannot plan everything. We can plan, but there's a higher and bigger plan that is takes priority, and it's beyond us, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can do our part by doing the work and believing, and that's what Tina did. But she had to wait, just like we all have to wait for our time, and her time happened to come around 44, 45 years old. Now, as far as her leaving the United States, the takeoff of her career was particularly prominent in Europe. As Tina said when she appeared on Larry King years ago, she was actually much bigger in Europe than she was here in the United States. So part of that also is indicated in her birth chart. She had her Mercury, Moon, and Mars form a T-square. And a T-square, even though the term is deceptive, it's not actually a square, it's actually a triangle. And she had this T-square between those three planets in her chart. And that Mercury that was in T-square was in her fourth house. Fourth house rules home and family. It can be, home like your family, but also home like your physical home and real estate and where you live. Mars ruled her ninth house, and the ninth house rules what else? International travel. So here you see shaping up here, T-squares can be considered challenging because of the aspects between those three planets are not necessarily easy. But me personally, I kind of like to see T-squares in charts. It may be easier in a solar return chart than it is in a birth chart, because that suggests a person's life, like lifespan, like what their challenge is in their life. But even in looking at that, I like to see a T-square because I know the person will overcome. To me, this the equivalent of knocking on a door to ask for, I don't know, milk, or ask if you're selling something. You knock on the door, say, hey, do you want this? And they say no, and they slam the door in your face. You knock on the door again. You say, hey, would you like to buy this? They say no, and you go and knock on the next door. Hey, would you like to buy this? No, and they slam the door again. And then you go to that last person, knock on the door and say, hey, would you like to buy this? Yeah, sure, come on in. To me, that's what a T-square is like. That's why I like to see it, because it means that a person will overcome something. So for her, to me, to see her Mercury, Moon, and Mars engaging her fourth house of home and her ninth house of international travel, suggesting that part of her overcoming everything will entail and be the result of her going international, foreign, or she'll succeed foreign, and then that will change her place of residence. Again, this is a long struggle for her because this is in her birth chart. That T square between Mercury, Moon, and Mars is in her birth chart. And so it was kind of a lifelong, hence it taking her so long to get there. So that's basically what I can cover so many things about her. I noticed a lot of things about her in terms of her challenges in her relationships, usually tied to like Neptune and deception, as well as something I want to mention to you guys. A lot of times when I'm on social media, I'll hear people say things like they don't like specific signs. And I know you've heard it, and you may have even said it. I try not to say that about specific signs because we need all 12 signs, and all 12 signs have their good side and their shadow side, right? So people say stuff like that a lot, but there's something I want people to consider. And part of how I came to this aha moment was looking at Tina Turner's chart. So most people know at this point that Tina had a tumultuous marriage to Ike Turner, in which he cheated on her relentlessly. He abused her physically, sexually, every way you can think of, to me psychologically, because it had long-term psychological effects on Tina. So this was a really challenging relationship for her. But I remember years ago, before her movie came out about her life, I read the book I, Tina, which is what the movie was based on. In this book, she talks about her life, and then they also interview other people. There was a part in the book, I believe, where she was talking about her first relationship in high school. And if I'm not mistaken, she said something to the effect, "This was the beginning of my Scorpio stage." So she was saying that the high school boyfriend that she dated, and I believe he cheated on her, had a kid with somebody else or something of that nature. I would have to look it back up. But he did her wrong for sure. And he happened to be a Scorpio. And for those of you that do not know, some of you may know, Ike Turner was a Scorpio. So I was looking at somebody else's chart, and it made me look at Tina's chart, and I wonder, it's like, okay, sometimes when I've noticed, I'll look at somebody's chart and there's a sign that they don't get along with, or they have a hard time with, and that person's sign, or the planets that they have in that sign, tend to be in that person's fourth house. So it made me look at Tina's chart. I'm like, wait a minute, I wonder where Scorpio is in Tina's chart. And I looked, and sure enough, she has none other than Scorpio over her fourth house. So that made me start to think. And even for me personally, I've had my own challenges with people who have planets that fall in my fourth house. The fourth house is, as I mentioned, it is the house of home and family, but it's also probably one of the most personal houses you have in your chart. And so for someone to come into your house, literally, figuratively, however you want to think about it, for someone to come into your house and be disruptive on that level, and that deep-seated soul level, it can be soul shattering. It could be an awful experience, as it was for Tina. Some of you may know Tina, as a result of her marriage to Ike, she tried to kill herself more than once. The movie showed one time she actually tried to do it on more than one occasion. So that was just a representation of how deep the despair can be if the wrong person has planets in your fourth house. And it also suggests that people that have a problem with a specific sign might want to look at the sign that's over their 4th house and see if that sign that they don't like, the sign that they have the most trouble with, is actually the sign that's over their 4th house. And so that may mean that that person has planets in their 4th house and is really disruptive. If a person is positive, it may not be as bad. It can be very familiar, almost like a family type situation. You can be very comfortable with each other, comfortable living together. But if it's a difficult relationship, that's that has a lot of abuse, mistreatment, the 4th house person in particular can have a really hard time with it. So that's like one of those little things. Yes, it has nothing to do with her leaving the United States exactly. But you never, psychologically though, that could have had some part of it, because remember I said the T-square pointed towards, or it doesn't point towards, but it encompasses the 4th house. And so her physical home moved overseas to Europe, but she was also partially motivated from the psychological damage that she had experienced and being in a relationship with Ike Turner for so many years. So that's something also to consider in terms of how she ended up moving from the United States. So I hope this was something that was thought-provoking, made you guys think, maybe even look at your chart and even look at that 4th house and see what's going on, and see, and maybe even look to see at your 9th house if there's some indication that maybe you might be moving abroad, or maybe there's some opportunity for you abroad. Well, until next time, I will talk to you later. Bye.